Hello guys, welcome back to our video. Today I am looking at doctrines and I will explain the doctrines to you. Doctrines have been here for a pretty long while. They are quite important as well and you should probably know them. You probably should. But in case you don't and you need more explanation, it's not just this stuff over here. It's a lot of stuff. Units get buffed, debuffed, all kinds of things, right? So this is a very useful thing to know. So you have four doctrines. You have Axis, Allies, Comintern, and Pan-Asian. Now Axis is commonly thought of as the best doctrine. I probably wouldn't argue with that much. It's a really good doctrine, but a lot of countries have it. For example, Italy, Germany, Spain, Romania, Turkey, so on, lots of countries. Then there's also the Allies doctrine, which of course the allied countries have, or countries that are democracies basically. So the UK, France, the Netherlands, Sweden, Egypt, South Africa, USA, Brazil, and so on. Then there's the Comintern, which not many countries have. As far as I am aware, it's only the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, which Yugoslavia just a few months ago switched from Axis to Comintern. And then there's more, but they are AI. Also, I believe Xinjiang has Comintern, so yeah. Those are kind of the only three though, which is unfortunate. There's also Pan-Asian, which I believe is Japan, Manchukuo, China, and Tibet, I believe. Also, Mongolia has Comintern as well, goddamn forgetting a lot. So yeah. Anyway, you can see the default buffs on these doctrines. Axis has a pretty strong buff. 15% more hit points, which is massive, as well as 15% more damage, which is also huge. But they have sort of a debuff, which is plus 10% production cost, so if your economy ain't good, you can really lack on production. Although these units are definitely worth it because these buffs are insanely strong, even with this being here. The Axis, also because of this, usually relies on the early game a bit more, as well as, getting a strong economy by annexing a lot of countries. You are really going with that power, as they say, and you are pushing through with a lot of strength. Next you have allies. Allies can be very strong. As you can see here, minus 30% production time. This means if your economy is strong enough, right, you can produce so much stuff, it's insane. That can also make the US extremely strong if your economy is maxed out. Like we're talking massively strong, insane as hell. They also have minus 25% research cost and research time, which is also insane. Also minus 20% cost and time for upgrading, which is also really good, right? You rely on levels here. Levels are very important as the allies. You can just mass produce very high level units, can be very strong in the early game and for a while, for most of the game, until others catch up on the research. The debuff is you have minus 10% movement speed, which ain't that insane. It's actually pretty okay. The Allies are pretty good doctrine, I'd say though. The Comintern doctrine, this doctrine is actually regarded as like the worst doctrine by most players, although I myself find it to be one of the best ones, either the best or just behind the Axis at second place. Why do I say this? Well, as the Comintern, whatever country you're playing, you're always going for that late game. For example, you're going for those heavy tanks, which are late game units mostly, and especially higher level heavy tanks, right? So you're going for that late game basically, and you're waiting, to have enough time to build up. They're also a very defensive doctrine, at least most of the time the Comintern is. We'll get into that a little bit later. But as you can see here, minus 15% production cost, which isn't bad, right? Not bad at all. You can mass produce units as fuck, right? If your economy is extremely strong, for example, imagine the USSR, you can make so many units, it's not even funny. Although with this, I think you should have a lower production time as well, right? That could be very useful because as the USSR, you're gonna have resources anyway, so that can be, it gives you more resources and you can make more units in a certain time. It's only production cost, which isn't that useful as the Comintern. At least most Comintern countries, or the USSR really. There's also the minus 25% upkeep cost. Now, if you don't know, there's an upkeep cost for your army. Kind of went through this in the economics video, but your army, whatever unit it is, it has an upkeep cost. It costs resources to keep that unit alive. And with this, you can literally spend a fourth less on upkeeping a unit, which means you can easily have the largest army even if you're not the largest economy. Imagine that on the USSR. Literally, as the USSR, on the RP game video I made, as when I played USSR, I had 840 units. So you can imagine what this fucking buff can do. Of course, I had a massive fucking economy, right? But still, that contributed a lot. You do have minus 10% damage, which is pretty bad, but is handleable, right? You can just outproduce everybody, usually. Moving on to Pan-Asian, right? So you're going for that early game strength. Usually as the Pan-Asian, you have a lot of movement speed, you have a lot of view range and terrain bonuses, right? So you're using every advantage that you can get to win a war. For example, against China, if China is mobilized, they are going to fuck the shit out of you. Especially when China was Axis Doctrine, right? Japan could outmaneuver them and fight them in their favorable terrain to win more trades and literally outproduce China even, which is insane. You could definitely do that. Although the minus 10% hit points can definitely fuck with you a bit. Anyway, moving on. Let's go down here. Axis Doctrine, while it's strong over here with the hit points and the damage buffs, you don't have much stuff here, not on infantry, not on militias, although over here you can see your first real buff, which is Motorized Infantry, which is really strong. You can get it 1 to 2 days earlier, upgrades and stuff, and you have plus 15% damage against unarmored, which is really good since this unit is already against unarmored units, right? It's very good against that. You can just roll through anything that is unarmored, and with that movement speed you can just do whatever you want basically. Moving on, you don't have much here, not on artillery, not on anti-tank. Anti-air is a little bit buffed against heavy tanks and aircraft though, not bad. Then you have nothing, even light tanks or armored cars. But you have buffed mediums, and these mediums are very strong. First thing you have is plus 15% movement speed, which can be extremely strong. For medium tanks, which are very strong units in general, 15% movement speed can be insane. Poland, USSR, anything, very strong buff right there. And with the plus 10% hit points, it just makes your medium tanks very hard to kill. Especially with the other plus 15% hit point buff and the plus 15% damage buff, which all that together makes your mediums extremely strong. Very strong, believe it or not. That's also one of the reasons why you don't want heavy tanks, because your mediums are very buffed and your heavy tanks are gonna get steamrolled anyway. You do get them a little bit earlier, but that's not much. Over here in Air Force you're not getting much, but do keep an eye on those attack bombers. That can be very strong. Get them earlier and more damage to unarmored, which ain't much because these usually aren't used to fight unarmored, but these can shred through heavy tanks and heavy armor, especially with this buff. Looking over here, well, Germany has one buff with submarines. It's in naval, which is submarines. You do more damage against regular ships and have more movement speed and get them sooner, which is a nice buff. Going over here, you can get some of the special weapons earlier and they are better. For example, the rockets are quite good, as well as the rocket fighters, and that's the end of the list. Not too much stuff there. I can say the same for the Allies Doctrine. You get Motorized Infantry later. Your commandos are quite strong with more movement speed and more damage against unarmored units. You can also get them earlier. This is quite strong. Can be very useful if you need them, of course. Paratroopers also cost less, which is nice. You get anti-tank a little bit later. This is not much, SP artillery is buffed quite a nice bit. You can get them earlier, you do a lot more damage against heavy armor, and you have more hit points. That is a real nice buff. Light tanks and medium tanks, you get them later, so I don't really recommend building them. Although I recommend building heavy tanks and or tank destroyers. You gotta be careful, unarmored units can fuck your tank destroyers and even heavy tanks, so you gotta be careful with that. But with tank destroyers, you get more movement speed, which is beautiful. Can get them earlier, and the production cost is smaller, which is nice as well. You can also get interceptors earlier. They have a nice bit of buffs on air. Tactical bombers have a bigger attack range. You can get them earlier, and they do more damage against light armor. Very good buffs right there. Should be used. Strategic bombers as well, more HP by a nice bit, as well as bigger attack range, which can be very useful. On a naval, you have really good destroyers, believe it or not. They can destroy submarines easily, have more movement speed, which is beautiful, and you can get them earlier. Although you get submarines a little bit later. You can get aircraft carriers a little bit earlier as well. And that's just about it. Although you can get nukes earlier too. Moving on to Commentary and Doctrine. The one they all talk shit about. Is it really that bad? Well, let's go ahead and check. I will say this ain't the best. It's definitely like the worst out of here. Although they have a lot of buffs on units. Going over here, militias are very strong. In mountains, they are absolutely insane. A commandeering country that has mountains can put a few of these in a mountain province. Don't forget these are cheap as fuck. And that mountain province will probably not fall. Extremely strong defensive units if used in mountains. Also, they have a good buff in urban areas, which can be very strong as well. You can also get them earlier, so very strong buff on militias actually makes them usable, and you can definitely get some advantages to using them. As I said, Commentary and Doctrine, a defensive, at least mostly defensive doctrine. Let's look at infantry. Infantry has an additional minus 15% upkeep cost, which makes them, not cost much at all to upkeep. Very small amount, so you can just spam a lot of these if you wanted to. They also have minus 20% production time, and you can get them earlier, which means you can just spam an insane amount of infantry if you really wish to. You can actually get so much that you can stop German tanks easily if you focus on economy the right way, right? You can be insanely strong with just infantry basically. Moving on, you get Mechanized a little bit later, and these are some insane buffs as well. If you thought this was good, well, let's look at this. Both artillery and anti-tank, it's the only doctrine that has buffed anti-tank. Artillery has minus 10% production cost and minus 10% production time. This means you can get an insane amount of artillery out. Insane. Right, an extremely good buff right here. Anti-tank, well, look at this. Plus 15% damage against light and heavy armor. That is an insane buff. These can easily stop German medium tanks without a problem. Moving on, this is a little bit later, doesn't matter. You can get medium tanks a little earlier, although don't be a dumbass. Medium tanks are garbage on Commentary and Doctrine. Assuming you're playing the USSR, Germany is just gonna steamroll your medium tanks with theirs. Theirs are much superior. These are garbage. Never make medium tanks as Commentary and Doctrine. Why exactly? Well, it's because your heavy tanks are extremely good. Not just because Axis medium tanks are gonna fuck your mediums easily. Your heavy tanks are extremely strong. Your heavy tanks as the Commentary and Doctrine are insane. You not only get them earlier by 2 days, you have 10% more hit points, and then this thing you don't get movement speed or something, you get plus 15% damage against heavy armor. This is insane. One of your heavy tanks can fuck the living shit out of Axis mediums without a question. I can literally imagine one of your heavy tanks taking out 2 or even 3 Axis mediums because of how strong this is. It's just very strong. You have to use this basically to your advantage. You get tank destroyers a little bit earlier, interceptors a little bit later. You're not very good on air. Attack bombers a little bit earlier, naval bombers a little bit later. And for navy, you have a little bit stronger cruisers by a nice bit. You also get buffed SP rocket artillery, which can be good. And that's it. Then moving on, the Pan-Asian Doctrine. These buffs are pretty good, although you gotta look at these two. Militias, you get them earlier, nothing really. Infantry has a nice bit of buffs, more health, a bigger force buff. This is a very strong force buff right here. If you're gonna fight somebody in forests, this can be very useful and very strong. Also, you can get infantry earlier. Moving on, artillery is buffed quite a lot. You have plus 15% damage against unarmored, less production cost, and get them earlier. As you can see already, the Pan-Asian is mostly focused on taking out unarmored units. You can see that here as well. Armored cars are insane against unarmored units. You can also get them earlier. Light tanks, it's the same, but you also get a buff against light armor as well. But you get tank destroyers and heavy tanks later. As you can see, you fall off late game because other countries get heavier armor and you just can't fight that. You also have very good interceptors, bigger attack range, better against planes, and get them earlier. Naval bombers are good as well, as you can see. You get cruisers earlier. You have very strong battleships. You get aircraft carriers earlier. You have a nice buff on the flying bombs, but you get nukes later. So that is it. Those are the doctrines. You gotta keep all of this in mind when playing countries. You can use it to your advantage. So don't forget to use it and learn about it. I will post a link down below of this list. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and goodbye.